Hey guys, my name is Mason and welcome to the first video of my new tutorial series on basic mixing and maybe novice mixing. And today I'd like to just say welcome, and I want to start off by mixing or showing you how to mix or showing you how to improve or show some techniques that I use to get a decent drum sound. And yeah, we're starting with drums today because that's usually the first thing I start with when I build a song. And as you watch more videos, you'll see the stuff that I build in, and then maybe later on I can show you some specific stuff that you like, and just some basic stuff. And yeah, don't take my advice like I'm a professional. I'm just a normal guy like you, and these are basic guidelines. You can copy me if you want. I don't care. But okay, let's get started. So we're going to look into what the first thing we have here, and the first thing we have is, you can see my DAW is Logic Pro, and we have my drum simulator or drum sampler called Superior Drummer. And for tutorial purposes, I'm just going to use this because these sound close enough to real drums. Amazingly done drums, these Superior Drummer, if you can hear. In each one has its own individual bleed, but you can look at Superior Drummer's site for that. So if you don't have a drum kit, or you don't have drum tracks, like actual audio forms, you can use something like this, samples, whatever. You'll still have the same kind of effect. You can still use the same principles to meld it all together. Okay, so first thing about drums, I like to start off with the overheads, because the overheads are nice to work with, because they set the ground for everything, and you can hear all the heads on top, so you can get a feel of the entire drum kit. And then I start to move down from the bottom up. So let's take a listen to what we have so far. And this is the song, and this is actually a MIDI file of Peripheries, if you know Periphery song New Groove. And go ahead and take a listen. And there you have it. That's the full finished version. I've already finished this, but I'll show you how I got these tones, and how I got here, and how everything sounds good. So the first thing is that you should look here, that this is the MIDI file, and then these are actually samples. So I'll turn those off now for education purposes. So the first thing we'll look at is the overhead. So we're going to go ahead and solo the overheads. And we're going to also go on the Superior Drummer. I'm pretty sure you have to do it here. I almost get this mixed up. There it is. So let's hear what these overheads sound like, and we're going to set on a loop track. So actually, I had no idea why it disappeared, but I guess this will be good for the tutorial. So what's actually on this overhead is nothing except a reverb, which is really bad. So this is a perfect opportunity. So we're gonna go ahead into our plugins, and And what I like to use for drums is a linear phase EQ, in which this pretty much prevents phasing. If you could look at the concept of phasing, which means like everything is like they're not completely in sync, and it sounds weird and very hollow sounding. And what linear phase EQ is prevents those kind of things, because when you adjust these bands on a normal EQ, it actually causes a sort of delay on the track, so it causes some sort of phase. So with linear phase, we prevent that, which is some great technology. So the first thing we're going to do actually is set a high pass filter on around 96. For metal, you probably want to bring it up maybe 150, because this will get rid of the body. Or for rock songs, you would want to have more body in the overheads. So let's take a listen and see what I mean here. So we're going to try it at 96 first. And we're going to try it at 120 or maybe 180. Usually for metal, you'd want to go a little like around 160 higher, because what you really want is the cymbals and not much of the body. But it's really up to your preference, and I like to adjust it according to what kind of song I'm doing. So for this song, it's metal, but I still like a little bit of body since it's the only track I'm doing on here. So I wanted it to sound full. But if it were to be with other instruments, I would actually put it a little higher, because I only want to hear the cymbals. Right? So, yeah. So you do the high pass filter, and then the second thing we're going to do is, since I'm going for the body tone, I want to raise the low end, but this one doesn't, this particular EQ doesn't let me go around 100. So actually I can live with that. So I actually compensated with going to 96 on the high pass filter. So the problem with cymbals is that they are very prone to muddiness. So you're going to want to go into the around the low mids and mid-range and get rid of those muddy kind of frequencies. I'll show you what I mean here. So if I bring this up all the way at a reasonable level, you'd understand what I mean. So it's so you can see it's very muddy, even though I raised it to exaggerate it, but even without that, there'll still be some mud. So let's see how it sounds when I take away that range. So we're going to look around 200 range and 800 range, and we'll get rid of that muddiness, and we'll see how much the cymbals start to breathe. So the cymbals are starting to sit a little better. They're starting to breathe more. They may sound a little bit more hollow, but that range is supposed to be filled up by like bass or like toms or a snare. So remember, this is just really quick. I'm just really doing this quick. But cymbals, get rid of that mud, because it can really add up, and it's really, mud is your enemy in any mix. So you don't want that. The second thing is, you don't want to touch the 1 to 2K. Because that's really not where you want to sit, so just leave it. Don't mess with anything that you don't really hear. You can, but it'll give it this more really good, like a harsh telephony kind of thing, and you don't want that for cymbals. The next thing is around 2K to 5K, or 2 to 4K, and this is where vocals sit. So what you want to do for the cymbals is take away from this area, but don't take too much, because it'll suck the life out of them. But you want to be able to balance it between the vocals. Make sure it's not eating up the vocals, but make sure you don't kill them off too much, because if you take it off too much, you'll get something like this. So I'll take this off. Put this down. It should be alright. there's no vocals in the song, so you'd still want to be able to control it. So we'll leave it like that. So now, now we're gonna look at maybe a resonant signal that's really annoying. So we're gonna bring this up, this extra band that we have, and bring the Q up all the way narrow and see what's ringing a lot in our cymbals. Very subtle, very tight cut, around 4K range is where I found, 5K range. Last thing we're going to do is put a high pass filter, and a high shelf, and we're going to bring it up just a little bit for around maybe 8K, and because that's when the highs really start to begin. And I'm just going to bring it up a little bit, just a punch to give it, just a pinch, just to give it that life. If you do too much, it'll start sounding harsh, and it's like, it's annoying though. Yeah, that sounds good for now. So that's pretty much that part. That's easy. Now the second part for cymbals is considering compression. Compressing can be a little dangerous because you can really they start to become really harsh and aggressive. I personally do compress them, but just only a little bit, just so I can control the levels, and none of them are really peaking, just to give that really gentle push. So you don't have to. I mean, cymbals sound great without it, it's fine. But for education purposes, we're going to use compressors on this one, which I like to do. So we're going to free up a space here, and we're going to go to a FET type compressor, and I have the CLA 76. I'm going to make it blue. And what you want to do is a very slow attack, and I like to do very slow release, moderately fast release, slow release, so like it won't cause pumping. And ratio is 4, and gain reduction probably about not even 1 dB, not even negative 1 dB, maybe like half a dB. So let's try and see what we got. So very gentle, very subtle, not a lot of gain reduction, just to carve out those transients. Okay, so overheads are done. So next thing we're going to move to is the kick drum. So the kick drum is very simple, has a very standard curve. I actually have this one put into parallel compression. I'll turn that off for this sake, and I'll show you what I do. Okay, so the first thing I do, let's take these out. First thing I do is put a graphic EQ. I like to use a graphic EQ, the API 560. And this EQ is, you could also use parametric, but this EQ I find is like very simple, and the cues are just right. And it's enough to really get the shape I want. And if I really want to get surgical with a tough EQ that's like maybe like they don't kick hard enough or the sound's a little weird, I'll use a parametric. But for now, I'll use this equalizer that's graphic. So what I've done here is actually boosted up the subs just by a little bit. You can't really hear it, but it does give it that little bit of oomph. You have your 63, which is really where the kick lives for that big low end thump. So I put a lot into that. How much did I put here? Like 4. Then to make the kick sound deeper, you take away from 125. 125 range, low 100, 200 range, because if you bring it up, you'll notice that there's a lot of, it starts to sound like a cardboard. So the same applies from 500 to 125, and all there is where you don't want. That's where the drums sound very muddy. As again, mud is where the low mid lives. So get rid of that. So we got rid of that. For this, I don't usually put up 1K, around 1K. I never usually do, but I tried it for this one, and it sounded pretty nice. 2K, bring up the presence. 4K, great place for presence, for a lot of clickiness. If you want to have that punch, 4K for sure. 8K has that, just a little bit in there, so you can have that click. And I use that for metal, because metal, the double bass kick, that's where it is, right? So we're going to listen to it without it on first, bypassed, and then we're going to listen to it after, with the overheads running, or actually no, we're going to turn it off for educational purposes. So let's listen. So the kick sounds like that, so let's turn it on. So the kick sounds pretty good, sounds a lot deeper, has a little bit more of a click, and I like the way it sounds. So next thing I'm going to use is a max bass, and this brings up the harmonics of the low frequencies while not actually raising the low frequencies, so we can really pump some low end without putting too much low end on the spectrum. So it's kind of an illusion of making it seem deeper. So let's listen to it without it. And with it. So that sounds great. I like it. It has that deep tone and stuff. And I actually brought up the 8K range so I can compensate, because max bass tends to really chop off the highs, and I don't like that. So I actually brought up 8K. 4K a little bit more to compensate for that. The last thing I use on kick drums is a compressor. It's the normal, what type is this again? I think it's FET. Yeah, FET type compressor, and slow attack, the slowest attack, and then a moderately fast release, and the ratio is 4. And the threshold, I only go about -4 because it starts getting a little abrasive when you go beyond that. And 4 is like the best. Like, you can use that for anything. So I go with 4. So let's hear it without the compressor. And with the compressor. Okay, and that's for that part. Kick is done. Let's hear how it sounds with the overheads, which we've done already. See, it also has some low end from the overheads, which we got from that high pass filter, so it adds to the kick drum. Good. So the second thing you do is, I do, is go into the snare drum, and I actually specifically look at the top snare drum, and then we also work on the bottom snares. We'll talk about that later. So for the snare drum on the top, we'll solo it. So what I've done here is put a high pass filter to get rid of the low frequencies. That would cause some low end buildup, which also interferes with the kick drum. So know that. This one is the same thing. Remember, look, as you can see here, there's not that much low mids. Low mids is the enemy for drums. Get rid of that. No one likes that. I actually put a little bit of a low shelf at 100, just a little bit to give that body. You could also use a peak if you wanted to do that, but I'd use a low shelf because there's nothing else in the song, so there's nothing really interfering with it. Then I raise the presence, which is around 3K to 4K. Raise that by a little bit, not too much because it's a little harsh in the ears. And then 6K to bring up that bite. and I use a high shell for that. And since there's no bleed on this one, I could actually raise it a lot. But usually on an actual drum kit, there would be a lot of cymbal bleed and hi-hat bleed around this area, so only raise it a little bit. Be careful about that, okay? And then the second thing is compressor. Compressor will have slow attack, just like the kick drum, and a fast release, so that it releases back to the normal gain before the next transient, which is good for drums. That's what you really want. Slow attacks, fast release. Got it? Good. Okay. Threshold. The thing about the threshold is really up to you. You can, the more you reduce it, the more it won't sound like a drum, and the more harsher it will sound. So I actually like to go about maximum -3. But what we got here is that. So let's see how it sounds. Okay, so that's that, and now we're going to go to the bottom, and the bottom I actually start with compression. And compression will really give it that desired kind of tone that you want, so let's hear it with that. And then with it. So same kind of settings, just but I really smash it down to give that ting kind of tone. Filters, same thing. And EQ, same thing, but you can boost more into the lows and more into the highs, which will support the top snare drum. So let's hear them together. Bottom snares, really good for ghost notes. And then we also have the hi-hat overhead, and I just pretty much use the same settings as an overhead. Get rid of the get rid of the low mids, boost up the lows, and bring up the presence. And you can see how it sounds all together. So that sounds good. Alright, snare is done for now. And this is also routed into a parallel compression, which I actually showed here. That's fine, I'll talk about that later. Actually, I'll turn this one on now. Hi-hats use the same settings as overheads, and maybe bring out maybe a muddy resonant muddy frequency off there, but for this one it was actually okay. Last thing I do, or second last thing I do, is toms. So what I'd like to actually do is bring up the one tom part here. So let's look at the toms by itself. It sounds very deep, very deep. It's like deep booming. It's great. I love it. How I got there, I'll show you. So we're gonna turn off these, and I'm gonna show you the first one. And actually, I'll show you how it sounds without anything before. Sounds like a piece of plastic. That's shit. So, work some magic, some EQ magic. You may have noticed that as I was EQing some stuff, it's really more about subtracting and not about adding. Adding to give it that boost, but it's mainly about getting rid of the shit you don't want to hear. As you can see, all the drums have had this lowered area here. No one likes that. No one likes that. For toms, this part, they're very notorious for building up a lot of mids. So for here, I went a little bit drastic, and I actually took out around 4 dB and very wide scoops. So I can use all the bands and just get rid of that whole section. You don't even need that whole section. You don't need that. For the low, this was a floor tom, so I actually made the high pass filter very low, so because I like them to resonate. But for like a higher tom, you'd want to go like 90 or 70 because you don't want that much low end, but you want more of that note that they kind of hit. But for this one, it was a floor tom, so I went really low and I wanted to rumble. Then I went up the presence range, which is 2 to 5K again. I brought up the attack on the tom, so and also 6K also brings us to the attack. So let's hear how that sounds. Sounds good. It's starting to sound a lot better. Let's see how. Actually, I'll show you what it sounds like before without. So let's say I put these up. So it sounds deeper, it sounds a lot better, and that's the aim we want. For the low end, you may have noticed I didn't bring up low end. For toms, I like to use max bass as well because it's again using harmonics, making it feel deeper, but not actually interrupting with the bass or the kick drum for the low end. So let's see how it sounds. So it already sounds deeper, sounds a lot more better. Again, max bass likes to cut off the top end, so that's why my presence range is a little bit higher than it would be. Then the same concept with compression. Slow attack, moderate fast release, and the threshold is around -3, -6. If you compress it too much, it's going to start sounding like clicks. So I like to do as least I can. So that's already too high, so let's bring that down. And let's see how it sounds with the stuff that we have so far. So that's good. And then we're going to turn on the parallel compression bus that I have here and see how that sounds. So it gives that more punch. I'll explain that when we get there. Now the last thing, which you kind of don't need for metal, but it still gives that kind of glue to the drum, is the room mic. Now the room mic is a little bit weird. This mic, you actually have to use a lot of compression. This will give life to, how's my dog? This will give life to those drums. So let's hear how they sound without the room mic. Let me loop this part here for you guys. So it really gives that air, like that big air, and gives it that spaciousness and glue, and you know what I mean. You'll see. So this is the room by itself, without any plugins in. Now, this is really great for rock songs. This mic is actually very essential to rock songs. So this is probably the most important, one of the most important elements of the drum kit for rock songs. So you have to use this with care. Don't overdo it, or it's going to sound really abrasive and annoying. You can really hear it, especially when we're about to do what we're about to do on it. So same thing, linear phase EQ, perfect. Look at that, getting rid of the mids again. Fuck mids. Bring up the lows, because you want to emphasize the low end of the drum. That's pretty much the whole point of the room mic. And then you'll notice that the cymbals will get very abrasive, so I actually put a high pass filter here and got rid of those. Tried to control, tame those frequencies. So let's see how it sounds. You may think, oh, that doesn't seem that bad. It's actually okay. But when you start adding the compressor, you'll see why we need that. Get rid of those mids and those highs. For room mics, you actually want all buttons, fast release, fast attack, and it'll give it that really pumpy kind of lively feel. And you'll hear it in a sec right now. And then when you merge it with this track, so it really did give it that life, that vibe, that feel that's a real kit. This is a fake kit. I mean, listen to that. That's great. That's great. So, pretty much all the elements are done. Then all you do is pretty much add some reverb to all the elements that you want. Actually, I need to put a reverb there. And then your kit's pretty much done. I also have some samples loaded on here. And I use the same principles as well. Like this snare sample is actually, I use the same settings. Or actually I adjusted to it, but I use pretty much the same principles. Same with that kick drum. And I'll talk about samples a little bit later, but right now we're just dealing with this. We also have parallel compression. Parallel compression is pretty much same kind of idea on the room mic. You go super extremes. It gives it really that pumpy kind of really hard attack. And that adds a lot of punch and bite to the designated ones you want. So I've sent these to a bus, which I'll explain in a later video if you want. And I've sent the desired ones, kick, snare, toms, the samples, to this bus, which will do parallel compression and make it sound a lot better. So, well, that's actually preference. But for metal, yes, parallel compression all the way. So let's hear how it sounds with parallel compression and the samples. So the samples really brought a lot of life to it. Some people don't like using samples. I didn't like using samples at the beginning, but if the song calls for it, then go ahead and use it. They are real drums. They're not completely fake. They're just recorded a lot better and have some effects on them. So the last thing you can see here is basically a master bus with a compressor, a slight compressor of glue that will meld it all together. But that's mostly for just doing the entire mix, but I like to do that for everything. Right? And there you go. That's your drums. And that's how I mix drums generally. And let's take one last listen. One last listen with no effects on. And then with effects on. So let's go ahead and turn all these off. You'll really see the difference when of what we've done here. Like nothing fancy, no special magic. It's just simple EQ and compressors, which is very simple tools, the bread and butter of mixing. So I'm going to mute this parallel compression because I want to turn off those buses. So let's see how the song sounds without any effects and without the samples. So that sounds alright. Pretty good for raws, but let's put the magic and all the work that we've just done here. And we'll see how it sounds after that. Actually, I got this new Magic trackpad from Apple, and I'm still getting used to the controls. I've been using a mouse for the longest time. But actually, once you get used to this kind of material, it's not that bad. And let's listen to our finished product. Enjoy. And that finishes the tutorial. Hope it wasn't too long, but at least I hope you learned something from this, actually. I didn't want to make it too short because I didn't want to like, leave things out. You'd be like, oh, wait, you didn't know what you told me. Well, try to help you out here. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. If you want to see more tutorials, rate, comment, subscribe, thumbs up, whatever the hell it is. And I'll try and post more videos up and maybe cover some other elements of this thing. And maybe I was actually thinking about doing streams of doing an entire mix, like a couple of hours or something like that. But whatever. That's it. This is drums. This is your video on how to mix drums. My way or your way, whatever way you want to call it. And I hope you learned something. And thanks for watching.